Clean the bore of the chain housing and the outer race of the bearing with Loctite primer and allow it to dry. Then coat the mating surfaces with 620 retaining compound or 640 sleeve retainer, which is available commercially. Or use Loctite 271 thread locking kit. Using the handle and driver assembly, and with the press plate installed on the front of the chain housing, install the new bearing into the chain housing. Now, install the support into the back side of the chain housing in between the water pump studs. The tool holds the inner race of the bearing when pressing in the timing chain idler sprocket. Install the 2 snap rings. The oil-air separator assembly can be unfastened next by removing 2 bolts. Disconnect the oil return hose from the fill tube. The oil fill oil level indicator guide tube comes off next. Be sure to use a new O-ring at installation. If the repair order indicates abnormal oil consumption, inspect the lower oil fill tube down in the block for proper installation. The row of holes in this tube must point toward the oil filter to prevent the oil splash created by the crankshaft from loading the tube with oil. Carefully unfasten the clamp holding down the 2 steel fuel lines and fasteners holding the fuel rail. Cover the injector tips to prevent damage or dirt intrusion and secure the fuel rail back near the cowl. Removal of the intake manifold begins by disengaging the coolant circulation tubes. Disconnecting these tubes from the cylinder head and thermostat housing will allow them to be removed from the throttle body. Disconnect the IAC and TPS connectors, then the throttle cable. This will allow the throttle body to be removed along with the intake manifold. The intake manifold support bracket on the block can now be unfastened, and then the manifold bolts, nuts, manifold, and gasket can be removed. The next assembly to be taken off is the power steering pump, 2 brackets, and a drive belt. 2 different power steering pump drive pulleys are available on the high output Quad 4. If your diagnosis of the original pulley indicates a wobble, the pulley can be replaced with a revised component. To remove the pulley from the camshaft, use the special tool. Rotate the forcing screw to disengage the power steering pump pulley. Install the original or the replacement pump pulley using the special installer tool. The pulley is fully installed when it bottoms on the shaft. The new pulley has a different hub design that allows the use of a special removal tool. To remove this pulley, apply the tool to the hub. Rotate the threaded forcing screw while holding the tool body until the pulley is disengaged. There is a lip seal on the end of the intake housing which must be replaced anytime the camshaft housing or cover is disturbed. Remove the seal with a suitable tool, being careful not to scratch the camshaft or the cam housing seal bore. To remove the camshaft housing cover, unfasten 12 bolts. There is a sequence for removing the bolts. Turn each bolt only 1/2 rotation at a time, in sequence, until the valve spring tension is relieved. Be sure to reverse this procedure using the same sequence when the cover is reinstalled. This procedure prevents the cover from warping. To open the cover, install 4 bolts in these locations. Leave 2 of the cam housing bolts lightly tightened to keep the housing from falling during this procedure. Alternate tightening the bolts to maintain even pressure on the cover and continue until the cover opens. The camshaft housing bolts have pre-applied sealer lubricant on the threads. Usually, an adequate amount of this sealer lubricant will remain on the threads after the bolts are removed. This material should not be removed by wire brush or solvent. If there is insufficient sealer lubricant on the threads, use Loctite pipe sealant with Teflon. The camshaft housing cover serves as the upper half of the camshaft bearing. The camshaft can now be lifted out. The shaft is a double lobe design. It is made from cast hardened iron for wear resistance. Next, remove the lifters. Keep them in order. Place them upside down in oil to reduce bleed down until they're ready for installation. The camshaft housing can now be lifted from the cylinder head. The decision to make the housing separate components from the cylinder head was made to accommodate the cast-in lifter inserts and the oil gallery. The camshafts are run directly on the precisely machined cast aluminum camshaft housing and the cover without any bearing inserts. No service of these bearing surfaces is possible other than lubricating them before reassembly. Before removing the exhaust camshaft cover bolts, remove the oil pressure sending unit. Then remove the end plate to allow the cover to separate from the housing. Notice that this end plate is also an engine lift hook location. Repeat the same procedure as on the intake camshaft housing. Loosen these bolts 1/2 turn at a time until there is no pressure on the bolts. This prevents warping the cover. Be careful not to let the housing assembly fall off the cylinder head. This will damage the lifters. Leave 2 bolts partially installed to keep the housing from falling. Once the cover is taken off, notice the molded silicone spaghetti seals. Each seal is different. These non-reusable seals, blue for the intake housing and red for the exhaust housing, fit precisely into grooves which have been machined into the camshaft housing. With the cylinder head on the engine, it is possible to remove any valve spring in order to access the seals and rotators. Here is how that service is performed. With the piston at bottom dead center, remove the spark plug and use an airline adapter to inject compressed air into the cylinder. This will hold the valves in place during the procedure. Install the valve spring compressor and the valve spring compressor T-bolt. Do not use a nut or washer with the T-bolt, as this could damage the aluminum gasket surface. Remove the keepers, the retainer, and the spring. The valve seal can be removed with a slide hammer and valve guide seal remover. New valve seals are installed using a valve guide seal installer.